A dull ache pulsed at the base of Kemi's skull, an echo of the violence that had just unfolded. Moments before her world faded into nothingness, her stepmother's face, contorted with rage, hovered inches from her own. That face, so skilled in playing kindness for the outside world, now revealed the firestorm of cruelty Kemi lived with every single day. Darkness swept in, muffling all memory but the impression of Mama Bisi's fury. Yet this darkness was not new to Kemi. It was the silent companion she had carried since childhood. Kemi was only 18, but the relentless weight pressing upon her soul had aged her far beyond her years. Her life had been split in two, before and after her mother's death. A time existed, blurry and golden in her memory, when laughter filled their small house. But that bright season ended as abruptly as a summer downpour. After her mother died, Kemi's father, Baba Adai, a thin, hard-working man whose hands were shaped by years of tilling the stubborn earth, remarried. Mama Bisi entered their home with a reputation as a vibrant market woman. Outside, she wore the mask of cheerful trader, her baskets overflowing with palm oil and dried red pepper, greeting neighbors with a smile that lit up the market stalls. Everyone admired her, envied the ease with which she charmed customers, and haggled without anger. Kemi watched from the shadows as Mama Bisi built her public image like a monument, always the first to offer a helping hand, always ready with a well-timed joke. But the moment the compound gate creaked shut and the world withdrew, her warmth drew back. Within the walls of their home, she embodied fire, a fire not of warmth, but of burning, unending torment. Kemi bore the brunt of Mama Bisi's wrath. Every dawn started in cold darkness, before the cock's first crow cut through the silence. She crept barefoot to the stream, balancing heavy clay pots of water on her aching neck, her breath steaming in the chill. At the compound, she swept the dust and leaves, the rhythmic stroke of her broom, a constant plea for approval that never came. Mama Bisi's own children, Tunde and Bisi, lounged inside, their laughter drifting easily through open windows. Kemi washed clothing until the skin peeled at her knuckles, pounded yam until sweat soaked through her dress, all while hunger gnawed at her belly. For her impossible labor, she received only cold, clumpy pap left from yesterday's meal, her step-siblings biting into thick, steaming stew with chunks of tender wheat. Each error, real or imagined, invited swift punishment. A slap, a shout, sometimes the sting of the wooden pestle Mama Bisi wielded with terrifying skill. Kemi's father, kind but absent, left home before dawn for the farm and returned after sunset, groaning with fatigue and focused only on sleep and food. Kemi learned to keep her suffering hidden. She met his eyes with quiet smiles, masking the storm of pain roiling inside. Her heart grew heavy, her spirit muted. Loneliness took root in her chest, her only companion in the prison that was her home. And I apologize to the author for interrupting this story. I would be very pleased if my listener would like, subscribe, and leave their thoughts on this story in the comments. I won't delay you any longer. Enjoy. One night, The ordinary pattern shattered. The sky was unusually clear, the moon bright as a lantern. Wind rushed through the trees, carrying voices and rumors past Kemi's window. She lay awake on her thin mat, staring into shadows that refused to settle. Something in the air felt wrong, charged, almost humming with silent warnings. Kemi's thoughts churned restlessly, replaying the day's events as she listened to the strange whispers swirling just outside her door. Unable to quell the unease gnawing at her, Kemi climbed quietly off her mat. She tiptoed to the tiny window against the far wall, straining to pierce the night with her gaze. What she saw drained all warmth from her body. Figures moved across the yard, gliding in single file with eerie grace. 4 women, swathed in black wrappers that glistened in the moonlight, wove their way toward the far end of the compound. Their movements were slow, almost ceremonial, and unmistakably, one of them, her bearing, the slope of her shoulders. The air of silent authority was Mama Bisi. Curiosity and dread battled within Kemi, forcing her limbs into motion. She slipped past the sleeping forms of Tunde and Bisi, stepped into the darkness, heart thundering as she followed the procession. She stayed low, her bare feet soundless upon the hard-packed earth, hiding behind the broad trunk of the ancient mango tree, as the 4 women formed a circle beside a smoking fire. Their faces gleamed in red and gold, shadows twisting them into something unrecognizable. They began to chant, their voices weaving a tapestry of arcane language, harsh syllables that rose and fell like waves, punctuated by the hiss and crackle of the small flames. Kemi's breath caught. She knew none of the words, but their intent was palpable. They summoned a power older than memory. Suddenly, one woman spoke in a voice chiseled from stone. "It is time," she declared. "A strong life must go." Mama Bisi stepped forward, her eyes cold and unyielding. "Yes, my husband will be the one. His spirit will bring us power. In 3 nights, he will belong to us." Horror seized Kemi. Her hands trembled, her knees nearly buckled. There was no room left for doubt. These women, led by her stepmother, were planning the destruction of her father. Terror surged through her limbs. She must run! She must warn him! Kemi turned and stepped back, desperate to keep her discovery safe, when her foot snapped a stick in the underbrush, loud as a gunshot. Instantly, the chanting ceased. 4 sets of predatory eyes zeroed in on her hiding place. "Someone is there!" A voice rang out, fierce and commanding. "Catch her!" Mama Bisi screeched. Panic overtook Kemi. She fled into the darkness, the world blurring in a rush of cassava leaves, thudding feet, and the cold bite of fear. Kemi's flight was wild and frantic. The chill night pressed in, her breath coming in jagged bursts, legs straining as she darted past the goat shed, through tangled bushes and crops battered by wind. Behind her, angry shouts and calls echoed, pushing her faster. Suddenly, the air shifted. A shadow flared into shape before her path, a cloud of black smoke rolling and swirling around her body. It stung her eyes, filled her lungs, choked her screams into silence. She stumbled, vision swimming as panic sizzled under her skin. Then Mama Bisi appeared, terrible and victorious, alongside a flash of blinding red light. Kemi's world spun out of control, the earth seeming to tilt and fold under her feet. Darkness claimed her once more. Time twisted and blurred. Slowly, Kemi's consciousness returned to her body, but everything felt wrong. The world around her had stretched and shifted. Grass appeared like thick, towering blades. Stones loomed larger than life. She tried to speak, but the only thing that escaped her mouth was a plaintive, strangled bleat. Alarmed, she looked down, and terror froze her heart for the second time that night. Her hands were gone, replaced by 4 slender legs ending in hooves. Her body was covered in coarse white fur, and when she shook her head in panic, she felt the weight and bulk of horns curving elegantly above her ears. Kemi screamed in her mind, but no human voice would come out. She was a goat, her body transformed by powers she barely understood, by malice so pure it felt like poison. Grief and horror stormed through her heart as she relived the moments before. Her attempt to save her father, her accidental discovery, and now, her helplessness. She had lost herself, girlhood, voice, and all hope of help. Mama Bisi returned, gloating. Her smile was sharp as broken glass. She dragged Kemi, now a trembling goat, by a rope back into the house, whispering coldly, "Let's see you warn your father now." Each word struck with the force of a slap. Kemi tried to weep, but goats have no tears. She tried to plead, but her sorrow came out only as desperate bleats. Mama Bisi tied her outside near the smoky kitchen, leaving her vulnerable and completely alone. The night stole all hope. Kemi shivered in the cold, her new body fragile against the chill, her mind caught in a storm of fear, regret, and the desperate need to warn her father. Inside, Mama Bisi performed a ritual with palm oil and whispered words that thudded in Kemi's ears. Then she left Kemi on hard earth, alone, weak, shivering. What will happen to me? Kemi wondered. How can I save Papa now? Each question added another weight to her broken heart. Before dawn, the rooster crowed, a harsh, mocking call that usually summoned Kemi to the world of chores. But this time, it echoed emptily in the compound. Baba Adai awoke, his body heavy with fatigue, and immediately looked for Kemi, as was his habit. "Kimmy, bring me water," he called. Silence. He frowned, puzzled at her absence. She was always up before the cock's first crow. Hopeful, he imagined she was already at the stream, but unease gnawed at him. Meanwhile, inside the house, Mama Bisi schemed with chilling precision. She prepared a large basket, packing dried fish and peppers on top to disguise the real prize within. The goat form of Kemi. She threw a cloth over Kemi, muffling the breath and sound from her small, panicked body. Then, balancing the basket on her head, Mama Bisi set off toward the market, her steps brisk and purposeful. Kemi's heart hammered inside the tight basket, panic suffocating every rational thought. She was being taken to the market, sold as meat, her own humanity erased, her chance to save her father evaporating as the distance from home grew. Mama Bisi hummed a strange, tuneless song as she walked, her face composed, betraying no hint of the wicked delight in her heart. To passing villagers, she was the same. Gentle Mama Bisi, trading wares and greeting friends. Only Kemi, trapped and terrified, sensed the joy her stepmother derived from her suffering. At the bustling market, Mama Bisi set the basket down, tying Kem, still wrapped in cloth, to a short stick beside her trading table. She declared loudly, "Strong goat for sale, very fat, very healthy," as crowds milled past inspecting goods. Some touched Kemi's fur, others tugged her ears, discussing prices. Kemi's goat eyes darted desperately, her mind pleading for understanding, her voice restricted to bleats that no one interpreted. The hours dragged by, each moment filled with humiliation and despair. People argued over her price, debated her worth, and moved on. Mama Bisi's frustration grew each time a sale fell through, her grip cruel on Kemi's ear whenever she tried to bleed for attention. No one saw past her form to the human girl lost inside. Time passed and hope waned. At last, a young man, quiet, poorly dressed, and marked by hardship, approached. He examined Kemi for a long time, his gaze lingering thoughtfully. "This goat," he said, voice slow and grave. "How much?" Mama Bisi's eyes brightened with greedy anticipation. "For you, 6 calories," she replied, setting the price high. The man nodded, and coins changed hands. For the first time that morning, Mama Bisi allowed herself a real smile, one devoid of warmth. The rope was handed to the man, and he led Kemi away from the market, down the dusty village road. Despair clung to Kemi, heavier than ever. She was being walked toward her death, sold not as a child, but as food. The man lived far from the center of the village, near the big river, in a modest hut with a palm leaf roof. On arrival, he tied Kemi to a post in his small backyard, muttering, "Tomorrow you will make a good stew." Weak and terrified, Kemi stared at her new prison. Her mind screamed, "No, I am not a goat. I am a girl." But only bleats filled the air. The man disappeared into his home, leaving Kem beneath the broad daylight, exposed and frightened. She scanned the yard. Calabashes, firewood, and a lone bench, her only companions. Realizing this could truly be the end. Minutes stretched to hours. Suddenly, soft footsteps approached. A young boy, perhaps 10 years old and barefoot, his red shirt torn at the collar, stepped close, his eyes wide, curious and bewildered, focused intensely on Kemi. "This goat looks strange," he whispered, inching closer. Her eyes look like a person's eyes. As the sun dipped behind the acacia trees and long shadows crept across the ground, the young boy lingered by the trembling goat. His small hands, rough from labor but gentle, reached out uncertainly, and he knelt in the dust, curious eyes meeting Kemi's desperate gaze. For a long moment, both were silent, the boy, named Aoife, contemplating the strange sadness in the animal's eyes. Kemi, struggling against the thick barrier of her new body, willing him to see her truth. Aoife spoke to her softly, unaware that his words were arrows of hope. "You look so scared. Don't worry, I'll try to be your friend," he murmured, brushing a clump of grass closer to her mouth. But what truly caught him was her stare, the pleading, the intelligence, the raw humanity. He had seen many goats, but none like this. The way she jerked back when his father brandished a knife, the near-human panic in her brown irises, and the subtle, contained dignity that clung to her amid her terror. All these things unsettled him deeply. Later that night, when the household was quiet, Aoife crept back outside, bringing an old, faded blanket he kept on his cot. He draped it gently over Kemi, trying to shield her from the chill. "Father says tomorrow you'll be meat," he whispered, voice catching. Even as a boy hardened by want, he could not ignore the sense of injustice pricking at his conscience. A story his grandmother once told him about people bewitched and changed into animals fluttered to the surface of his mind. Maybe you're not just a goat," he said, half in jest, half in terrified awe. Kemi, in her body and mind, was shattered. Yet this small act, a blanket and a whisper in the dark, planted something bright within her, a flower of hope pushing up through iron soil. Aoife didn't know for sure, but Kemi sensed that he was open to her truth. She blinked slowly at him, willing him to keep believing. That night, for the first time since her transformation, Kemi did not weep in soul-racking loneliness. Instead, she clung to the possibility that one person. The next morning came with heavy air, the world tinted with the purple hush of dawn. Aoife woke with restless energy. The goat's haunting eyes had filled his dreams. He tiptoed to his grandmother's hut at the edge of their compound, uncertain whether he would seem foolish in his worry. His grandmother, Moyo, was ancient by village standards. Her face was carved with decades of laughter and loss, her voice heavy with wisdom. She sat outside with her calabash and cowries, murmuring to the spirits of her ancestors. When Aoife explained, faltering and shy, about the strange goat and its human eyes, Moyo listened. She did not dismiss him. Instead, she nodded gravely, fingers tracing patterns on the dirt. "In our land," she whispered, "there are spirits who walk in fur and flesh. There are fears too hungry to be named out loud. But you saw her suffering. Never ignore such pain, no matter what body it wears." Guided by tradition and her own sense of empathy, Moyo drew close to the goat. She squatted beside Kemi, muttered prayers only ancients carried, and looked into the animal's eyes. For those long moments, it felt as if time paused in the compound. The chirping cicadas and distant calls from the farm faded. Moyo spoke not in Yoruba or English, but in a rhythm older than both. Kemi, trembling and exhausted, met this gaze with raw hope. "Talk to me," Moyo murmured. If there is human sorrow inside you, show me. At that, Kemi forced her body forward and pressed her forehead gently against the old woman's hand. A gesture so human it could not be missed. Tears sparkled in Moyo's clouded eyes. "We must act fast," she told Aoife. "If evil magic is in play, we must find the root." As the village woke, Moyo and Aoife prepared a plan, a ritual to reveal Kemi's true form, and if possible, break her enchantment. The old woman sent her grandson to fetch special herbs, bitterleaf, river mint, and dried hibiscus from the bush and stream. These, she explained, could awaken spirits trapped by dark magic. Aoife ran with fierce purpose. Kemi watched with pounding hope that her nightmare might soon end, and was reminded of the small mercies people can offer when they listen with their hearts. At dusk, Moyo built a small fire in front of the hut and tied Kemi nearby. The flames were red and gold, licking at the cooling shadows. Aoife returned, clutching a bundle of leaves and tiny gourds. Together, grandmother and boy prepared a potion. Moyo sang softly as she boiled the herbs, the words looping and curling in the still air. The scent was sharp and earthy, and Kemi felt her mind swimming with fragments of memory. Her mother's laughter, her father's gentle smile. Her home before suffering. When the brew was ready, Moyo poured it into a clay bowl. She dabbed some on Kemi's nose, sprinkled it over her head, and gave her a little to drink. "Let what is true be seen, and may no evil hide its face," she intoned. The stars blinked bright above, as if listening. Suddenly, the air shivered. Kemi felt her limbs grow heavy, her mind leap and swirl. It was as if she was caught between two worlds. Her body resisted, but her soul pressed forward. Aoife watched, eyes wide, as Kemi's form flickered. For a heartbeat, he saw the blurred outline of a girl, eyes blazing with need and desperation. Moyo gasped, her wrinkled hands trembling as flickers of Kemi's humanity rippled through the animal shell. The ritual did not break the enchantment completely, but it shattered the boundaries between Kemi's spirit and her body. She could now communicate in broken images and emotions with Aoife and Moyo. "I am not what I seem," her soul seemed to say. "My father is in danger. Mama Bisi will kill him." The message thundered in Moyo's spirit, clear as the first rays of dawn. Aoife sobbed, torn between fear and awe. Moyo knew they had little time. "Enchantments of this kind," she explained, "grew stronger with each day. Only swift action could save Kemi and her family." She gathered her grandson close. "We must act tomorrow, before the morning sun washes away our chances." The night was thick with urgency. Moyo stayed awake beside Kemi, chanting prayers and weaving protective charms. Aoife, too afraid to sleep, watched the fire die to embers. In Kemi's mind, fear warred with hope. She could almost taste freedom. If only her helpers were fast enough. Meanwhile, back at Kemi's home, Mama Bisi planned the final act of her ritual. She hummed as she sharpened her kitchen knife, gathering the tools needed for the deadly ceremony that would steal Baba Adai's soul. Unbeknownst to her, the village spirits stirred. Moyo's old magic whispered on the wind, drawing strength. At first light, Moyo instructed Ifa to run to Baba Adai's pineapple fields. "Tell him the truth," she urged. "He must return, not for work, but for his life and his daughter." With his heart hammering, Ifa sped through the village paths. He found Baba Adai resting beneath a tamarind tree, face drawn and sad. Fa struggled to explain about the goat, the witchcraft, about how Kemi was not lost but transformed. Baba Adai, at first, listened in disbelief and grief. Her disappearance had wounded him deeply. Only when Ifa described things only Kemi could have known, a lost bracelet, a secret song, did Baba Adai begin to understand the truth. He raced home with Ifa. Along the way, they met Moyo leading the now weakened Kemi, still in her goat body, but walking with new resolve. Moyo explained the depth of Mama Bisi's treachery. Together, the four hurried home before the final ritual could be completed. In the village compound, the air was thick with magic and malice. Mama Bisi stood at the center of a chalk-drawn circle, her face twisted with purpose. Just as she raised her knife, Baba Adai burst in, clutching Kemi the goat and flanked by Moyo and Ifa. He shouted, voice ragged with fury and heartbreak. "I know what you have done. Stop this now, or the ancestors will curse you." Mama Bisi's face drained of color. Moyo stepped forward, weaving her charms, and sprinkled protective powder into the circle. She began to chant, ancient words that set the shadows quivering, her voice steady as drum beats. The magic in the room shifted. Mama Bisi screamed, trying to finish her spell, but her power was met, then overwhelmed by Moyo's. As the forces battled, the spirit inside Kemi grew stronger. Her body shone with a bright light, a sign to all that her true self was fighting to return. The villagers crowded outside, staring in awe and fear. With a final, echoing incantation, Moyo struck the ground, and the curse broke apart. The goat shimmered, and in place of the trembling animal stood Kemi, her eyes wide and soul restored. Baba Adai cried out, embracing his daughter. The villagers rejoiced. Even Ifa wept with relief. Mama Bisi, now exposed and powerless, fled in disgrace, her wickedness revealing itself to the village for the first time. Kemi stood before all, not just as a girl returned, but as a survivor. She looked to Moyo, who nodded with pride. "Love is stronger than witchcraft," the grandmother said quietly, "and kindness can always call forth miracles." The stunned silence that followed the breaking of the curse soon gave way to waves of relief, joy, and disbelief. Kemi sobbed as her father gripped her tightly, cradling her just as he had when she was small. In the noisy commotion, the villagers began murmuring, their eyes wide as they processed what had unfolded. Children peered from behind their mothers. Old men shook their heads, muttering prayers of thanks or fear. Moyo, her body tired but spirit bright, placed her hands on Kemi's shoulders, and smiled with infinite tenderness. Yet even as celebration threatened to spill over, Kemi felt the aching remnants of her ordeal. The chilling hunger, the confusion, the indignity of 4 legs, and the inability to speak. Her mind was a mosaic of pain and hope. She remembered the moments in the night, alone and frightened, wishing for someone to see her pain. She remembered Mama Bisi's cold gaze, the threat not only to her life, but to her soul. Baba Adai stroked her hair, lost in gratitude and guilt. "My daughter, I did not protect you. I almost did not see," he whispered, his voice rough. Kemi shook her head, tears streaming. "You didn't know, Papa. How could you have?" For a while, they said nothing, simply holding each other as the sun rose higher, warm but gentle. Moyo beckoned Kemi to a quiet spot near the edge of the compound, away from the crowd. "You have survived what few could," the old woman said. "But magic, even when broken, leaves scars. You must keep telling your story. Lessons bloom." "The village must learn." Kemi nodded, heart pounding. She understood now that survival was not enough. The truth must be spoken, even if some refused to hear. The cost of silence was too great. As she walked back to her family, Moyo's wisdom echoed. "Forgiveness, child, may heal yourself, but you must never forget." Word spread swiftly. By midday, every hut, every farm, every path in the village buzzed with talk. The elders gathered to debate, the women whispered, and even the strongest skeptics were shaken. Mama Bisi was nowhere to be found. Her house, once a place of gossip and influence, was silent. Some people wondered if she had been cast out by the ancestors. Others speculated she had vanished into the forest to escape their wrath. Baba Adai and Kemi sat beneath the mango tree, watched over by Ifa and Moyo. Neighbors arrived in a cautious stream. Some brought gifts, a woven mat, handfuls of roasted maize, a scarf for Kemi. A few knelt, begging forgiveness for their part, even if only as silent witnesses. Kemi, shaken by their vulnerability, found herself moved to comfort them rather than blame. Eventually, the chief and council arrived. With formality, they called for a gathering. Moyo stood beside Kemi, urging her to speak her truth. Trembling, but guided by the wisdom in her grandmother's eyes, Kemi told her story. The fear, the transformation, the agony of being unheard, the miraculous return. Her words were simple but powerful, cutting to the core of the villagers' hearts. The chief listened with gravity. "We have been blind to the suffering among us. This must not happen again. Mama Bisi has brought shame and darkness. Her magic must be watched and feared, but our kindness must be stronger." He declared a special day of remembrance to honor not only Kemi's survival, but the lesson buried in her ordeal, that when community turns away, evil finds room to thrive. The villagers nodded, their resolve growing. Some wept for Kemi, others turned their anger toward Mama Bisi's memory. Kemi herself felt a complex mixture: relief, sorrow, and determination. She was no longer just a victim. She had become a symbol. Life settled into a gentle rhythm, in the weeks that followed. Though everything had changed, Kemi's days were filled with both ordinary chores and healing. Working in the pineapple fields with her father, helping her mother mend baskets, playing with her little brother in the shade. But there was a new respect in the way people greeted her, a watchfulness and warmth that had never been there before. Aoife, once merely a neighbor boy, became a frequent companion. He visited most afternoons, bringing stories or small treasures, a polished stone, a feather, a wild orchid. Kemi found solace in his friendship. He never asked for details, but always saw her, remembered her ordeal, refused to let her carry her burden alone. Moyo, too, visited, offering herbal teas and wise words. Sometimes she would sit with Kemi in silence, letting the quiet speak for their sorrow and hope. When the world turns cold, we must be the warmth, Moyo reminded her. Villagers slowly learned to speak of what had happened. Mothers gathered their daughters close, telling the story as a warning and lesson. The children played new games, building goat-shaped dolls and acting out rescues. The little ones, most innocent, saw Kemi as a hero, someone who could conquer even the wildest magic. Kemi's nightmares grew less frequent. The days became brighter, her laughter softer but more frequent. Yet in all her moments of joy, she remembered those who still suffered in silence, who might yet need help. She vowed to be a voice for them, a guardian for truth. One afternoon, as the rain swept in and transformed the dust to fragrant mud, Kemi sat alone, lost in memory and wondering about Mama Bisi. She found herself torn, haunted by anger, but also by the question of forgiveness. Could she find it in her heart to release her hatred, to wish her old enemy not further suffering, but peace? Moyo joined her beneath the shelter of the small porch, watching the rain. Forgiveness does not change the past, but it keens the heart for the future. The old woman pressed a warm palm to Kemi's back. If you hold on to hatred, it becomes its own kind of witchcraft. The cycle must end. Kemi nodded and closed her eyes. She remembered the terror and loneliness, but also the few moments of unexpected mercy. Aoife's whisper in the dark, Moyo's hands, her father's tears. These were what mattered now. When news finally reached them that Mama Bisi had died alone in the forest, a chill ran through the village. But Kemi felt a strange warmth. She whispered a quiet prayer, not for her tormentor, but for herself, to let go, to be free. The rains washed away the sorrow, leaving only memory, compassion, hope. That day, Kemi became truly whole, her spirit no longer bound by vengeance, but open and ready. With the old magic broken and the memory of hardship fresh, a new era whispered itself into being. The chief gathered the village for a celebration, part in thanks, part in promise. Kemi was seated at the center, a figure of resilience and forgiveness, celebrated not for the suffering she endured, but for the courage she had shown and the heart she had kept open. Songs were sung and drums beaten. Children danced in bright colors. weaving around Kemi and her family. Her father, once broken, stood tall. Her mother laughed and clapped with pride. Aoife grinned, as wide as the sky. Moyo offered blessings, renewal, protection, community. That day, the village committed. No suffering would go unheard, no voice dismissed. Ancestral stories were told, but new ones, too, about breaking curses, the power of kindness, and the strength of unity. Kemi allied herself with these vows, determined that what she endured would become fuel for a better world, not a source of bitterness. As the festivities wound down and the golden sun descended, Kemi walked with Aoife and Moyo by the river. She dipped her hands into the cool water, feeling the past drift downstream. Hope, at last, felt like more than a fleeting glimmer. It was something solid, fierce, and permanent. Her journey, though born of suffering, was crowned with love and renewal. And as the village began anew, so did Kemi, a girl, a survivor, a voice for all those who might yet need rescue. As weeks turned to months, the effects of Kemi's ordeal rippled through the village like the rainy season's first flood. No longer did people dismiss stories of magic or suffering as distant fables. Instead, they listened closely, opened themselves more fully. Mothers taught their children not only caution, but kindness, reminding them that monsters could wear familiar faces, and sometimes heroes came in small forms. Inspired by Moyo's example, Kemi began spending time with those who most needed gentle attention. She visited elders who lived alone, offering to fetch water or sit quietly in the evenings. She played with children who were often left to themselves, listening to their stories and creating new games. Slowly, she formed a circle, a gathering of young villagers willing to defend the weak, to seek out hidden pain, to tell difficult truths. Aoife, ever loyal, was her first recruit. Together they recruited others. Abiola, who'd lost her mother to fever and carried her own secret fears. Tunde, whose quiet manner belied a gift for seeing what others overlooked. Moyo, their guide, called them the Circle of the River, the place where many streams meet, making something stronger. Through this new sense of purpose, Kemi's nightmares faded even further. Her days brimmed with hope and laughter. Yet, even in harmony, she remained vigilant. She understood now that darkness could return at any time. It was a truth she shared with her friends. We must always be ready to see with our hearts, not just our eyes. Just as life seemed to settle, the village was faced with a new trial. News arrived from a neighboring village. A young boy had vanished without a trace, and fear of witchcraft once again shrouded the region. People whispered in corners, old anxieties rekindling. Kemi knew immediately that this was why her voice mattered, not just for her own healing, but to remind others that fear could be met and overcome. She gathered the circle by the tamarind tree and told them, "We must help, even if it's risky. That's what we promised ourselves and the village." With Moyo's blessing, The group journeyed on foot to the neighboring village. There, suspicion and sorrow weighed heavy in the air. Families clung together. Rumors of dark magic mingled with grief. The missing boy's mother, hollow-eyed and thin, welcomed Kemi and her friends with trembling hope. Kemi approached with gentle words, asking for patience and trust. The circle spent days searching for clues, questioning, comforting, observing. Ifa and Abiola discovered footprints near the riverbank and strange talismans left in the grass, symbols resembling those Mama Bisi once used. Though progress was slow, the circle refused to surrender. Their kindness brought hope, and soon other children joined their search, learning to trust rather than fear. When, at last, the missing boy was discovered hiding in an old fruit shed, frightened but safe, the relief was overwhelming. He had run away from home, terrified by the village's harsh superstitions. Kemi and her friends learned something crucial. Sometimes the real dangers were not just magic, but the hurt caused by suspicion, isolation, and silence. With their success in the neighboring village, the circle's reputation grew. People came from miles around to seek advice from Moyo, and Kemi was asked to speak at council gatherings. She carried herself with modesty, but fierce resolve. Always attentive, careful never to let pride cloud her empathy. At one gathering, the elders debated new ways to protect their children and root out hidden suffering. Some believed in stricter rules and endless rituals. Others called for openness and compassion. Moyo reminded them, voice resonant, "It is not magic or power alone, but listening, honesty, and love that makes a village strong." Kemi added quietly, "We must protect one another, not just from curses, but from loneliness and fear." Her words resonated deeply. Parents remembered her suffering, her miraculous return, and the bonds forged through kindness. Over time, these discussions led to changes. Communal workdays for families in need, storytellers to encourage healing and connection, new rules to ensure any claim of suffering would be investigated, never ignored. Kemi realized her greatest gift was not bravery, but the ability to inspire others to look, really look, at pain and to act on what they saw. As years passed, the story of the girl turned into a goat became woven into the village's spirit. Kemi herself grew into a young woman, strong, joyful, and wise. Ifa, always beside her, became her closest friend and confidant. Together, they traveled to other towns, sharing their story and their circle's lessons. Moyo, growing frail but ever resolute, urged Kemi to write her tale for later generations. "One day, you will grow old," she said softly, "and stories may fade if not written." So Kemi began her letter to the future. She wrote about fear, loneliness, and transformation, about how a single act of kindness could kindle hope in the coldest night. She shared the pain of silence and the power of being seen. The letter became a book filled with drawings and stories. Children, even those not yet born, would one day read her words and remember. "If you ever feel alone or unheard," Kemi wrote, "remember there is always someone who can listen. Be that someone for others and for yourself. Her heart felt lighter with every page. The nightmare now a lesson. The lesson now a legacy. At the edge of adulthood, Kemi stood once more by the river, her circle beside her. The water ran fast and clear, and the world beyond glittered with possibility. The village celebrated one final gathering for Moyo, honoring her lifelong wisdom as she neared her journey's end. The old woman addressed the people, eyes sparkling. We do not banish evil with strength alone. We do so with unity, with tenderness, with courage to face what frightens us, instead of running away. Kemi took this as her promise. She would never forget what she had endured, but more importantly, she would never allow another's pain to be ignored. Aoife clasped her hand, and the circle made a vow, not just spoken, but lived. To see, to protect, to love. As the sun set, throwing golden light across the earth, hope felt boundless. The village was forever changed, and so was Kemi, not a victim, but a guiding spirit. Her story wound on, its roots deep in memory, its branches reaching toward every new generation that would hear and learn. And so the circle of kindness endured, fueled by the girl who had learned the true magic of listening and love.